Perfect. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Vagish. I'm a software architect. I'm actually originally from London, but I live in the US. I kind of travel all over the world, and I do a lot of work in the startup space. I'm not going to go through all of it, but as you can see, I like to travel. Okay. All right. So today, I'm here to talk about Firebase, right? How to help you fast track, speed up your process using Firebase. So the idea is Firebase revolutionized app development. I don't know, anyone here not heard of Firebase? Okay, cool. I guess a couple people haven't, which is good. Probably not good. Anyway, so what we're going to do is focus on Firebase. I'm going to kind of go through a couple of the tips. I'm not going to go too in depth in terms of what's available. No real code in here. All right, so the idea behind Firebase is it gets you to your MVP faster. MVP is a minimal viable product, right? So it's basically like, if you're building a product, whether you're a startup or you're, established company, what is your minimal viable product is the one that you take to your customers, right? And how do you take it? So that's the goal, is to get you to that faster. So for the people who don't know what Firebase is a comprehensive app, well, mobile and web platform by Google. It wasn't actually made by Google, but was acquired by Google, I think in 2014, and then they integrated it deeply within the Google Cloud Platform and other things. But anyway, the goal of it is it helps you basically, it's a suite of tools that helps you basically build your product, improve your product, grow your product, market it, a bunch of things like that. It is, it's an ideal tool for any company, whether you're large, small, startup, or established. Okay, so Firebase's role in development, right? So it's a backend as a service. So it provides a serverless backend. For the people who don't know what serverless is, like, a server is like just like your computer, right? And with your computer, you have limited resources. You can only do certain things. Serverless is basically, you have unlimited resources. You get multiple computers depending on each time you want to use your serverless command or function, it creates a computer for you, right? And the nice thing about that is it basically ends up being scalable. And by scalable, you can build it out. Your app can scale as big as you want. Everyone wants to build an app that works like Facebook and can have billions of users. But that's what it helps you with. And it works with web, iOS, and Android. So the key components, and I'm taking this from more of a business angle, this slide, is it helps you with your development. So it's got real-time databases, storage options, machine learning capabilities, a whole bunch of things. And also Firebase works with a lot of the Google Cloud Platform tools as well. So you don't have to just use Firebase. Anything that's in the GCP toolset will integrate and work with it. On the growth side, it has tools for analytics, which is key for your application. A/B testing. Say you want to figure out whether having a button on the left results in more clicks versus having it on the right. Actually, funnily enough, in English, it's better to have the button on the left, because that's the first thing you read, left to right, while in Arabic, you actually read the other way. Something I learned on another project. And then monetization. So there's Google AdMob. If you want to make money on a mobile app, you use something like Google AdMob, and it integrates very well into the Firebase suite. Okay, and this is how Firebase markets itself. So there's 3 sections: build, release, and monitor, and engage. And the build is the Firestore, which is the database, authentication, extensions, which we'll discuss later, which actually fast-track your development process, release and monitor, crash analytics, which you're going to need. If you're, have you ever hated it when your app, you're you're playing a game and it crashes, right? If you're the game developer and you don't know that app's crashing, it's bad. Your users are not going to be happy. They're not going to like it. Performance monitoring, that's really important from an aspect of, how performant is your application. Google Analytics, if anyone's built a website, Google Analytics is the base thing you use. The same for iOS, Android. The new GA4 basically treats everything like a stream, so you can use the same GA4 on all of your applications. Then I'm not going to talk too much about Engage, apart from there's a cloud messaging, which is a tool. It's a bit more in depth. Okay. So why do developers choose Firebase? Okay, so it's one of the things, it's ease of use. It might look daunting at the beginning because there's so many options, so many things you can do with it, but it definitely is really easy to use. The other thing is it's time efficient. Rather than you building your own backend as a service, you don't need to build it. You want to access a database, it's got the SDK has the tools to access that database. You want to access, you want to create a user, there's tools to create a user. You want to do OAuth, you want to do two-factor, whatever, there's tools for that in there. And then it's also seamlessly integrated into the Google ecosystem. So you want to do maps, it's like, you can use, you have, that you can use the same credentials to access the Google Maps API key as Firebase. So a couple use cases for startups, and I probably focus more on startups because that's the space I'm in, is just rapid prototyping. You want to go build something, you get it out as fast as possible. You want to be the first person to market, right? So if you take a long time to build stuff, you're not going to get to market first. So that's why you use something like Firebase that takes care of all that backend, takes care of the authentication, takes care of all the things that you don't want to think about, which means you can have a smaller development team and go deliver faster. Enterprise app solutions, it's a scalable thing, right? The sky is the limit. Unless you become bigger than Google and crash the system, which is very unlikely. By the time you get as big as Google, Google will probably be bigger than you. But it's scalable, right? You want to have 1 million users, you can use Firebase. You want to have 1 billion users, you can use Firebase. You could even probably cover the whole planet and not have any issues. And then for the people who are students here, personal projects, there's a huge free allotment of use. You can do a lot of stuff with the free tier, right? So if you want to do stuff, you could probably even make money on the free tier. You can make an actual application that's being used, generating you money on the free tier before you even have to spend money. And even when you do, it's very minimal, the cost. So I'm going to go into a case study. So this is the kind of the meat of the talk, is this case study. So you get an idea of what this is in a real-life situation, right? So imagine you're going to make a social media app, like whatever, Twitter, X, Facebook, whatever you want, right? So you want a social media platform, but it's for your local community, right? So maybe a social media platform just for Colombo. Like you want to talk about the best restaurants here. You want to talk about, where to go to, you're planning events, whatever. You want to split costs with your friends, whatever you want it to be. You can make it whatever you want. But the thing is, you don't want to think about how your database is going to be, where your database is going to be stored. Think about servers, all these things, right? But in this case, let's look at this. So your goal is you want to get to market first because you want to get it out first. There's already another guy who's thinking of a similar app. You want to get out, right? So you do quick deployment is your first thing. You want it to be scalable because you want it to cover the whole. First, you're starting off in Colombo. Then you want to go to Sri Lanka. Then you want to go bigger. Right? You want to do the whole world, but right now you're talking about one city, right? And you also want it to have robust user interaction features, and it needs to be real time. It can't be slow. It can't take time to get information. You don't want it to wait 4 minutes or 4 seconds for someone to get some data. You just want it to be like that. Okay, so your approach one, this is more of a traditional approach. You decide, okay, I'm going to build my own backend, right? Where do you start? You start with a custom API on a server. So you go and say, okay, whatever tool, like I just threw in Node.js and MongoDB, but you can do Java, you can do Ruby on Rails, you can do Python, whatever backend you want, right? You can even build a full stack application, right? But for this case, we're just focusing on Node and MongoDB. So you go and say, okay, I'm going to set up a Node system, I'm going to set up MongoDB, great, I've got it, I've decided, okay, I'm going to host it on I'm going to host it on Heroku or Google or wherever you want to host it, right? You just go get a server set up. You realize, for your database, you need a server. You go set up the server. You set up MongoDB. You install everything. You're managing all the security aspects of it. You're making sure, MongoDB is up to date. You're making sure you have enough RAM on it, enough CPU, all of those things, right? A lot of those things that you're thinking about is DevOps considerations. You need one person on your team, or if you're a small enough team, doing basically DevOps, right? And so you're focusing on that. And then you say, okay, I want to do subscriptions, right? You want, just like how X charges you money, and you've got X Premium Plus now, And then, there's like Meta something. I mean, before you know it, it's going to be like $99 to like have some X premium plus, plus, plus. Anyway, but you want to integrate Stripe because that's the one you've heard of. Everyone's using Stripe on the web. You want to integrate Stripe, right? And then you say, okay, then you go and you have to go look at the documentation. You figure out, you have to go and look at the documentation and do that. So then you say, okay, I want user authentication, right? So you say, okay, well, I want a normal user. I want to have like, I'm going to do communities, right? So I want a manager for those communities, those roles. Oh, I want admins. I want people who are in charge of, making sure that there's like no hate speech on the thing. So there's community managers, whatever, right? Whatever roles they are. And so you build this whole role base, everything, and you say, okay, and then how am I going to do the communication to the back end? Right? You're like, maybe I'll use a JavaScript web token. Oh, no, actually, you know what? I'm just going to put it all on one application. I'll just have it directly communicating with the back end over there. Or, there's so many considerations. The reason why I'm pointing all of these out is like, so you think it's like there's so many things you need to think about, so much architecture you need to make, right? And then you think about that, and you're like, okay, well, what about the security? Like, if I build my own custom authentication, which I actually have done before, mark my words, it took our team more than 1,000 hours to build our own authentication system, and then we realized that was the biggest mistake of our lives. We made our own thing like JWTs, we built our own tokens, we built everything, and then we just scrapped it because we thought it would be cheaper than paying for like authentication, right? Which, so most of these things I'm telling you is from like all the pain that I've gone through, right? Okay. So then, what are the challenges of this? So as you saw, like I mentioned all these things that you need to think about. It's a complex setup for everything, from subscriptions to authentication, security, everything. Like all these things that you have to think about. And that means like, can you think about how big your team needs to be to do that? How big your team, like, you need someone who's got experience working with Stripe, someone who's got experience working with security, someone who's got experience working, with MongoDB to set up the database, someone who knows how to use Linux. I guess how many of you guys actually know how to set up a server? Well, that's good. That's actually that's not bad. But like, there's a lot of things you need to think about, right? Hardening your server, all of these things, right? Anyway, but then it's like, making sure the user authentication, that was the one I mentioned before, like how I built my own system. That's a lot of consideration. Or you could go and say, hey, I'm going to find another vendor, right? Which Firebase authentication is one. There's Auth0, Okta, all of these. And then you go on and say, okay, server maintenance. Someone's going to make sure they're patching everything. Someone's going to make sure, you get like, I don't know, there used to be a time where it used to be like if you got /dotted or, you got on the front page of Dig. I guess it's Reddit now, right? If you get on the front page of Reddit and you've got like a 10 gigabyte RAM and you've got like 4 CPUs, your server's going to go down. It can't scale. Although on the other side, I'll talk about the issues of scaling on the other side too. But your server will go down, right? And then it's gone. Like, you're losing money. You're losing money at that point because customers can't use your product, right? And then, obviously, as I mentioned, the bigger development team, you got to do more. You got to build out the scope better. You got to figure out everything you need to do, which means it's more complex, and it's going to take longer to actually take it to development. Okay. So option 2, okay? So we decide we go full Firebase. And some of these things you can mix and match too. You don't have to use all the tools with Firebase. You can use it with other things too, like other third-party vendors. But say you go, okay, I'm going to go full Firebase, right? Hey, I want to do a database. And you just go, I'm just going to use Firestore. You pull in the Firebase SDK, and you say, okay, I'm going to use Firestore. I want to use all the Firebase tools. And the ones we mentioned before, for example, there's Firebase functions and Firestore. Firestore is like MongoDB, or it's like a NoSQL database for people who are Postgres or SQL people. It's just basically like a big JSON blob, and you have multiple documents, and those multiple documents are just JSON blobs with information, right? It's like JSON's nicer than XML, but if you know XML, it's like that. It's like having like a book, right? And you've got like each book is a document, And then you have, hey, these are English books, and that would be a collection, right? And so that's kind of the simplest way to say it. And then you have Firebase functions. That is like your back-end code, right? Anything that you need to do that doesn't involve the database and isn't something that Firebase does out of the box will be done through Firebase functions. Like say you need to set, you're setting a flag you're setting a flag or something, and you're like, oh, hey, I want it to, you're doing, for example, a Firebase function would be a webhook, right? Say you're generating a link when a payment goes through, and it comes back and it's telling you that, hey, this payment's successful, and you can have a webhook, and that webhook is what's hit, and then that updates the database, right? So you can update the database from Firebase functions, but it's basically the back-end code, right? Then there's something cool that I don't know if many people have used, but there's something called Firebase extensions. So I'll give you an example. I integrated Stripe myself a long time ago. And it was like, it's probably, 50, 100 hours, making sure you get the subscriptions right, making sure the products are syncing, all of these things that you got to do. And there's a thing that you go on Firebase extensions. You can actually do it from the CLI, or you can go and do it in like the kind of library, the extension space. But you can go in and click a button, and then you go through the prompts, you give it the information, the Stripe API key, things like that, boom. It will generate the Firebase functions for you that you can use to create new products. Synchronize your user data with Stripe. By the way, Stripe is a payment provider for those who don't know. So you can accept credit cards, bank transfers, checks, anything you really want to do. And they do it like pretty much all over the world. So you can use Stripe. And so the way it works, once you get that, it basically creates those endpoints. It creates this, all the events. It creates, it basically does everything for you, in essence, right? And that's like, you can see the time savings, right? And then the last one is Firebase authentication. And that was the one I was talking about where I built my own solution, and then I use Firebase authentication. It's also for those people who ever go into the fintech space. You have to get like, SOC 2 compliance or PCI DSS, or all of these things. It is, their systems are all compliant. So you don't need to worry about it. You're like, boom, it works. It's actually a couple lines of code, and you can create accounts. You can, you can create accounts. You can delete accounts. You can do pretty much anything you want, really, right? And if you want to do email verification, you can do username, password, like any authentication you've seen on the internet somewhere, you can do with Firebase authentication, right? Okay. So I'm going to go through the advantages, right? First thing, it's rapid. You can set it up fast. You can deploy with extensions. The subscription management is so seamless, right? And the authentication is really easy too. And also with the real-time capabilities, you're basically able to provide the users a great user experience. And then using Firebase, you don't need to really think about the management. You don't need to think about a lot of the DevOps stuff, right? There's no server, there's none of those things that need to be thought about. You just go in, you access the database. You can have mostly developers who don't need to think about that back end. They're really focused on the front end. Oh, they want to, you want to build a table on a website. They know that this is where the collection is, and using the Firebase SDK, they know how to read the collection, right? And they know how to read that data, and it's fairly seamless. All right, and then, with the extensions, payment system is easy. Ultimately, it just speeds up your life, right? And that's the goal. It gets you to the goal faster. So, kind of a comparison between the two kind of approaches is, as we kind of went through, is the development time is definitely reduced. It's fast. You can use the Firebase integrated solutions. You don't need. It kind of is like having a back-end developer without having a back-end developer, right? Scalability, the nice thing is, we talked about, it's like, if you have a server, you need to make sure that you replicate the server. I mean, there are things like Kubernetes and things, but at that point, you're getting really, really deep into server management and infrastructure and DevOps. This is basically a solution that you don't need to think about how many people hit your website. It's the serverless commands just scale. You have 1 million people, it scales. The caveat is that it does cost a lot more because you're paying for each execution. So you do pay for it. So if you do get the front of Reddit, you will pay a lot of money. But if you're able to monetize that, you're golden. And then, the things like the user authentication, payment processing, it cuts a lot of that time out. And then the real-time data handling through Firestore. Firestore is very seamless. I've never really had it run more. It's never been slower than over a second. I've never had any time that it's taken over a second to do an actual document retrieval, update, delete, or anything like that. So, your users won't notice anything on the Firestore side. So, we kind of went through that approach. And then there's a couple tips that I've got that I think will be really useful for you as you try and maximize your efficiency with Firebase. These are basically like kind of practical tips and examples. So the first one is, this is something I use a lot, is leveraging Firebase functions for dynamic workflows. So there's the serverless functions, but you can actually, there's two ways you can trigger them. You can trigger them through a HTTP endpoint, which is like a URL, or you can trigger them on the activity of an actual server, on an activity or an actual document. So when you go onto a document and you create it, like for example, say you want, recently we had this thing where we were working with a client and they wanted us to create a user. So they wanted us to be like, okay, so when they go into their database, into their app, they say, hey, we want to create this user. So they create the user document, and that user document actually triggers an email to go, and that trigger is on create of that user document. It triggers it through Firebase. So they're using their actual front end is a no-code solution. So using that no-code solution that they have, they're able to do, like this URL that gives, basically says, oh, hey, can you go sign up for this account? And when they sign up for the account, it's hooked up to that user document. And it's using Firebase authentication. So they don't need to set an account. They don't need to create it. They just basically send this off. And the way it does is it's like on the document. It's the Firebase function is actually happening on the document, and it's on create. And when we do delete, we actually don't actually delete things. It's like you can do like a soft delete versus a hard delete. So those are the kind of two ways you can do a Firebase function, is either through a HTTP endpoint or through the actual document creation. Okay. Hey, sorry, having some technical issues. So this is the one I was talking about. So Stripe subscriptions, right? They're a lot of work, really hard to make. So this is the Firebase extension that does it for you. So you go into the, you want to create a subscription. You need to get to market fast. You don't want to, it always frustrated me because it's like, how many people do subscriptions? And they do the same thing, and every time people re-implement, rebuild, reinvent the wheel, right? And because there's all these different frameworks, different ways of doing stuff, I kind of understand why people do it. But I always found it frustrating because I could never find here's a package that basically does it all for you, right? So then I was amazed when I found this extension, which I was kind of like, why wasn't this there before? Why didn't this exist before? So there was a solution that Stripe actually made with the extensions. And what this does is when you set it up, it creates this create customer endpoint. So when a new user signs up, it will actually create the customer in Stripe. So it stores the data in Stripe as well as your database. And there's benefits to doing that. So it can store the credit card information against the user, things like that. You can have the user, basically, sign up for recurring billing and all of those things. And it helps you with analytics in Stripe as well, because then you can see, you don't have to be like, oh, user A bought this. You can be like, oh, John bought this subscription for, X plus, right? By the way, that's what I think they should have called X Premium Plus. Should have been X plus plus. It's a lost opportunity. But yeah, and then create checkout session. All of these ones, they're all just endpoints that are used, and it's it's got this thing which is on user delete, on customer data deletion. These are things that you need if you're actually doing most applications within Europe. So you can actually delete customer data, and a customer can actually say they don't want to be involved with you anymore, and this will actually sync it with Stripe. So it's like you don't have to build the deletion yourself. You just leverage this. So that the thing is, it just speeds up. Like, you can think about how much time it would have taken you to develop this, right? And go do the research on this. Like, if you don't know how to use Stripe, it's a lot of work to do. So, I know I was going to ask if anyone had questions, but maybe the better way is, like, I can do questions afterwards, so I can give everyone time. If anyone wants to connect, you can scan my QR code. It's my LinkedIn, and we can connect and chat. Okay. All right. With that, I will thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Vagish. So we have a token of appreciation for you as well. So I'd like to kindly invite you back over onto the stage to present Vagish with his token of appreciation. I now invite over to the stage Mr. Chamod Shehankar, organizer here at GDG Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a loud round of applause.